All right, Kevin. But actually, it's not Kevin. Today, it's the two Kevins. And
That's right.
back with you for another edition of the Million Dollar Relationships podcast. And Kevin, welcome, man. So great to have you here today.
Thank you, Kevin. Always a pleasure to see you, and thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, you and I, we go back a ways. I'm trying to remember when it was, but you and I met through Genius Network.
Yes.
But it was the role that you had in Genius Network was much different than the role that I had or that any other member of Genius Network had. So I think what would really be cool is, I don't want to speak to that. I can speak to it from an outsider's perspective looking in, but I think it'd be cool to have you share a little bit about that. And then also just kind of share, we can kind of catch us up to date too on what you're working on now, who you work with, who you serve, what motivates you to do what you do, and just kind of give everybody a context of who is Kevin Donahue?
Yeah, that's great, man. Thank you so much. Yeah, and we met. It was interesting. I play a game in life. One of my themes is life's a movie, write your own script. And one of the games I play in life is the guy that's speaking to you now. I don't want to recognize him this time next year. So what does that mean? It's like a caterpillar to butterfly type of transformation. It's living life on the edge or living out here, so to speak, where life is actually happening. In other words, I don't want myself to be defined by my culture. I mean, to an extent, we all are, but I want to be living out here and being willing to transform my life. And so when I met you, that was probably my third or fourth lifetime at that point, maybe more. But just to give you some background, I come from Washington, D.C. area, Northern Virginia. And when I started my career, I have a degree in criminal justice. I thought I was going to be an FBI agent, a Secret Service agent, U.S. Marshal, something like that. Because growing up in D.C., that's what you do. You go get a good job with the government and you stay there until you retire, which is a great path for some people. My father was a federal government worker. My mom worked for a school system, really good for them. But after I got out of college, I started applying for all these jobs, and they'll strap you on to the polygraph examinations and all this stuff. And I started thinking, I'm like, man, maybe this isn't for me, right? Maybe a long time career in the federal government isn't for me. I was following someone else's blueprint. Anyway, I got into sales. And to this day, I consider myself a professional salesman, right? I've had different roles in my life as CEO, founder, entrepreneur, but at heart, I'm a salesman and I love it, because I think selling, you can call it marketing or selling, is the most important skill to have. And it's really being evangelical, finding the right language to be able to, have people part with their hard-earned money for what you do or what you have, whatever it may be. And I've sold many products, but to go back to what I was saying, I was working within the federal government selling software technologies. Specifically, I was selling a search engine. This is back in the 2000s. And more specifically, a forensic investigative search engine. So who are my clients, right? My clients were the White House, National Security Council, Homeland Security, the CIA, FBI, Secret Service, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, FEMA, World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, AG offices, you name it, the big investigations that happened back in the 2000s, I was a part of in some way, shape, or form, whether it was part of the investigative agency or the people that were defending themselves with e-discovery in the court system. So anyway, living in DC, I found myself, really counseling the National Security Council or the White House. I sold the White House their email archiving system to the Bush administration, Obama. Trump re-upped on it, and Biden still uses it to this day. So every email that goes into the White House is on the email archiving system. I sold them. Anyway, I say that to emphasize who my clients were, and part of the skill set is how do you walk into the White House and have them trust you with not only a big piece of their budget, but also with their most sensitive information, classified and declassified emails. That's not selling, that's advising, that's positioning, that's selling a strategic solution. So that was my career, like the first part of my life. Very successful. I found myself, I invested in some real estate. I was living in a penthouse condominium overlooking Washington, D.C. from Arlington, Virginia. And Kev, I was real bored with life. I was like, man, I feel like I'm living someone else's script. And, I was a little depressed. I had actually launched a a retail business. I bought a franchise called Planet Beach at the time, and it was like a tanning and spa concept. And really excited about that. It was a membership model. Anyway, there I was with all this stuff. I found myself in a lot of debt, and I was bored. I was like depressed. And I said, man, if I had a magic wand, and I could do any 5 things in this world, what would they be? I was in my early 30s, and I said, well, I'd surf every day. Okay, well, I look out my window, no waves on the Potomac River in Northern Virginia or DC. I said, I'd get closer to my faith. I was raised Catholic, but I really want to understand the truth behind the religion. I wanted to do service work in an impoverished nation. I thought, like, who are the most successful people I see in America? A lot of them were immigrants coming from foreign countries. I said, what if I immigrated to a foreign country? And then the final one was, I wanted to learn to speak Spanish fluently, not just a few words here and there. And I said, okay, what's the one thing that could accomplish all 5 things? And I said, Costa Rica. So I put a map of Costa Rica on my bathroom mirror. And I said, that is my primary one goal. And then, at the time I was, probably a couple $1 million in debt with real estate and business debt and all this. And so, Benjamin Franklin said there's 2 ways to get wealthy. One is to spend less, the other is to earn more, right? The fastest way is to do both. So I went on this mission. I said, I am committed to getting to Costa Rica. And I encourage any of your listeners, find that one thing you can commit to and go all in on it, right? Because I knew if I went to Costa Rica, I could surf, I'd learn to speak Spanish, I'd be an immigrant, I could get involved in a church community down there, and I could do mission work in, either Costa Rica, Nicaragua, or the surrounding areas. Anyway, 9 months later, I was on my way to Costa Rica. I ended up getting rid of everything I owned pretty much, said goodbye to my healthy, lucrative career, and I was on my way to Costa Rica. Ahora hablo español perfecto porque estaba viviendo en Costa Rica para los años y fui a muchos países como Nicaragua, El Salvador. What I said was, now I speak fluent Spanish because I lived in Costa Rica for 2 years. I've been to other countries like Nicaragua and El Salvador, all throughout South America, and it's been a huge blessing. So, I tell that story to give you a framework of where I come from. It was big tech. It was enterprise sales. It was dealing with CEOs and directors of government agencies, working with Lockheed Martin and some of the big government contractors, multi-million-dollar deals. But I said, I want to do something a little bit different. And so going to Costa Rica was the next chapter in my life. And I was down there for 2 years. I taught surf lessons. I surfed every day. I got involved in a mission group, got involved with Christian surfers and another local non-denominational church. And by the time, to fast forward where you and I met, after I was done with my time in Costa Rica, it was time for a new chapter. So I moved back to the Scottsdale, Arizona area, and I had met a mutual friend, Joe Polish, down in Costa Rica. And we were at a 4th of July dinner or lunch, whatever it was, barbecue. And he says, hey man, could you help me grow this Genius Network? And I said, because you're an expert in sales, can you help me grow it? I said, yeah, sure thing. I think at the time, Joe probably had about 42 members, somewhere in there, between 38 and 50, somewhere in there. And we went to work and we grew that thing probably, I don't know, by the time I left, there's probably 150 members. We were also growing the Platinum 2.0 group, which you're familiar with. And then Joe launched the 100K group after that. So I was essentially a right-hand man for Joe for 2 or 3 years. Helping them grow that business, putting together strategies, connecting to different people. Because Genius Network was initially a information marketing high-level mastermind, but then it became something different. Like, how do we reach out to billion-dollar CEOs? How do we reach out to a different market? And that's really what we did, and we executed on it. And that's where you and I met. And then shortly thereafter, I went out to California. I launched a skincare business with a couple of guys. And then I became a member of Genius Network. So there was the time where I was part of it. And I was in every single meeting, every single annual event, and then I became a member, and that was great as well. So that's how you and I met. There was a couple lifetimes before that, but entering into that, that entrepreneurial phase in DC, launching that business. I also had an online business early on, before social media. I had made my pug famous. He was a Yogi the Pug. You could probably Google him and see him to this day. But that I ended up on the Rachel Ray show. I had calendars and stuffed animals and greeting cards and T-shirts, all kinds of products that I sold with this thing. And that was before I really understood direct response marketing. But I was able to kind of tap into a community out there of, dog lovers, pug lovers, and it went viral. In fact, I had one of the first viral YouTube videos back in 2005 or six
Wow.
when YouTube
Wow.
was new. So anyway, there's lots of different things, lots of different things I like to try and do, but that will catch us up to where you and I met at the Genius Network, sitting next to each other, going to lunches and dinners and really getting to know each other.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I remember you and I got to catch up last week really quick. And I still remember the one time that I brought my wife, Lisa, down to Arizona with me. She's got family there. And she came out to dinner with a bunch of us Genius Network members. And I knew that the last thing she needed to experience was sit next to somebody who was going to sit there and talk about business all evening at dinner. And so I strategically had her sit by you. And in fact, if I remember, I can't remember the shift she sat in between you and I, but she left that dinner that evening going, wow, that Kevin guy is such an amazing guy. And she was right.
Well, part of that, Kevin, and thank you for sharing that. I get chills every time you tell that story. I remember that very vividly. But, part of that is knowing who's in front of you and really being in their world and kind of co-creating a new world. And, this is in business, this is in life, this is in our marriage relationships, it's in our everyday relationships, right? Like if we can actually be present and be authentic with the person that we're with at the moment or people, right? It leaves a lasting memory. I mentioned about the White House, just because that's a high profile client, that is a 22-year relationship at this point.
Wow.
Right? I mean, it just keeps going. And because people remember how you made them feel or the impact that you made. And I guess making an impact in someone's life by being authentic and being an open book, that does make an impact or that is what makes them feel great, because you make an impact in their life. And it could just be a split second, and part of it, Kevin, too, is there was a time in my life where I was in my office and a bunch of people had sent me thank you notes, handwritten thank you notes. And I said, man, this feels really good. Reading these thank you notes, these people had put a stamp on an envelope, took a pen and got a card and wrote me a thank you. And I said, man, what an incredible feeling. I was like, wow, what if I got this feeling more often? I said, what if I became the kind of person, what if I set a goal to collect 1 million thank you notes in my life? What qualities would I have to take on? What kind of person would I have to become? Who would I have to find as a mentor? What would I have to do in the world, right? All of these things came to mind. It really is a great, people talk about moonshots. I'm like, okay, what about 1 million thank you notes? It's a pretty good moonshot, right? What kind of person? And so, when you approach life that way and individuals that way, it's not that you're after a thank you note, but you're being the kind of person that they're like, man, I'll never forget them.
That's right.
Boy, I'm grateful I met them, and you leave like really seeds of gratitude and love and, good feelings and impact everywhere you go in life.
That's right. And you're so right. Yeah. People always remember how we made them feel, and I can bring your name up to Lisa today and she's going to totally go right back to that moment, oh, he was such a great guy, Yeah.
And she was so great too. It's like, it's a mutual thing.
Yeah.
It's like a co-creation. Like you get to create this new relationship out of thin air and you may never see the person ever again, or you may end up their best friend. You may end up marrying them, right? Like if you're being that kind of person, you become unforgettable. So that sort of leads us up. And today I live in Nashville, Tennessee. At the time I was living in Phoenix, Arizona, with my wife, and we built an incredible life here. I have a company called Executive Sales Source where I do sales consultations in a number of different aspects, everything from information products to celebrities, to product launches, even in technology still. I have a client who is in the tech world. And then I've recently started working with a company that's in the cybersecurity world. So I'm sort of back in that enterprise technology from a cybersecurity perspective, primarily because cybersecurity might be the hottest tech topic in the world right now. We see it in the headlines every day. So that's been my most recent business experience. But like I said, check in with me a year from now. I'll probably be doing something different, right? or growing more, or check in with me. We could, arithmetic and numbers are always a good way of saying, hey, I'm doing great here, or it's time to move on, whatever it may be. So I've probably had about 20 businesses. I've had 4 or 5 that have been very successful. Some were good ideas, but they just weren't good businesses, whether that was because it was the bad timing or bad partnership or, bad, I'm not for that, or maybe it was got bad structure, all kinds of things. But, had some very successful businesses as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate you. You have such a colorful background, and I know one of the things you didn't even mention is because I know for a fact that you've helped people get their products like on Shark Tank and stuff, and help structure how to present to the sharks.
That's right.
And stuff,
That's right. I
kind of
forget
cool
that
too,
sometimes. Yeah. We got a deal with Mark Cuban for $500,000. We ended up turning the deal away because the terms and conditions. We got the deal on the show, but after the show, the terms changed quite a bit, and it wasn't worth it. But we got the deal, and that's the important part, right? Like, what's the conversation? What's the presentation that is so compelling that they're like, I'm a hell yes, right? And it's like, and if you understand how to use language appropriately and powerfully, and tell the right stories, and if you're there to serve, not sell. Like, I'm here to help you, and you create a picture of a future that didn't exist prior to you showing up, and then you invite them into that future with you, you never have to sell a thing in your life. You'll leave people touched, moved, and inspired just by the idea that you've planted in their mind, and then the opportunity is theirs. And if the opportunity is the right fit for them, they'll find the money somehow, some way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Man, I so appreciate you sharing all that, Kevin. Now I'm even more excited to kind of shift gears here now and get to go in the direction that we get to go now. And so I'm gonna reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners here, and then we'll shift gears a little bit. So, have you ever been introduced to a person that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person? And Kevin, I'm just really excited to hear, your experience around this and be able to allow you to share that, as well as be able to honor somebody who's had such a profound impact on your life and on your business.
Yeah, it's a great question, Kevin. And I'm going to mention one person in particular who had a profound impact on my life. And it was business, yes, but it was also my view of the world and my view of myself and everything. And that is my good friend, Mark Schneider. And Mark Schneider, I actually see, and this is the thing too, is you've got to take risks. I always say God grants miracles to those who take great risks, and leaving everything behind and going to Costa Rica was certainly a risk, but that's where I met my friend and mentor, Mark. Okay. And Mark was a very, very successful guy. He had launched many products on QVC. He invented a product, it was called the Cool Dana back in the late 80s. And the Cool Dana was like a bandana, but it went around your neck. He played football down in Florida. It was so hot down there. He's like, man, how can I cool down the body temperature? And he invented this. It's like a cool pack that you put in the freezer. And while you're playing football on the sidelines, you put this on your neck, it would bring your body temperature down. Mm-hmm. And, he first invented it. He was like, oh, this product's going to be great. Just like all of us, we have an idea, right? Sometimes we call it an entrepreneurial seizure. And he produced a bunch of these things, he put them on the, at the shelves at Herman's Sporting Goods. This is before Sport Authority, right? This is like whatever the sporting goods store was down in Florida, and he put them on the shelf, and he'd go in and check on the inventory, and he called them dust collectors, right? Because no one bought them, because no one knew what they were. And he realized he needed to demonstrate the value. And he was in bed one day or on his couch and, flipped on the TV, and there was this QVC, and he looked over and they were selling like 15,000 units in 15 minutes. And he was like, wait a minute, I got to get on this show. So he made all the phone calls, and he got a bunch of product, and he went up to the QVC headquarters, I think up in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia. And he went on the air. He was a young guy, late 20s. And he went on, did the presentation, thought he bombed, thought he failed. On the way out, everyone's high-fiving him like, hey, buddy, you sold out. We want to get you back on the show. And then after that, he had it figured out. Then he would just invent products like anti-tarnish jewelry boxes for women. Like, you name the product. He represented a lot of celebrities, sports celebrities, Stubbs barbecue sauce on there. Like, you name it, like, he represented them, and he made millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. And it was he just had the structure, and he understood direct response marketing. And, then he went on, he represented Joe Sugarman and Blue Blockers on there. And he knew everyone, Gary Halbert, he knew everyone in the direct response marketing world. And when I met Mark, It was down in Costa Rica, and you know, he was living in this gigantic mansion with his 2 sons and his wife, and he had kind of, you know, got tired of living in the USA as well, and he moved down to Costa Rica, and then he moved to Panama. And he's just really one of my best friends, and he just had such a profound impact on, you know, ideas. Like, ideas are great, but execution is even more important.
Yeah.
Right. And then also, you know, he had some very, very hard lessons. He was in some major lawsuits with people who knocked him off, and it was very difficult and heartbreaking. So, you know, also, like, how do you protect your IP? You know, how do you protect your patents? How do you protect yourself from people who are out to steal from you? Very important, right? You don't think about these things. You think business is all hunky-dory and you got this idea, who's going to support you? Not necessarily true. And also, he was heavily invested in, as far as investment goes, is in precious metals, possessional precious metals. You know, so he was just a very, very wealthy guy, but he was a good guy. If you met him on the street somewhere, you wouldn't know he was, you know, worth hundreds of millions or a billion, whatever he was worth. He was just a good guy, you know, and just a loving man. And we'd sit in his pool, we'd talk religion, we would talk politics, we would talk business, you know, and he was just one of my best friends for years. And sadly, about a year ago, he passed away. And that was one of the biggest heartbreaks of my life. And really one of the first times I've talked about him since then. But man, it was, you know, he was messaging me the night before, and the next day I get a call from his son saying, "Hey, my dad passed away." And I didn't believe it, you know, but what a wonderful man, and just a special guy. And he's one of these kind of guys you wouldn't hear about. You know, all the gurus are out there making videos and, hey, look at what an expert I am. Hey, look at how good I am. Look how much money I have. Mark wasn't like that. In fact, he didn't want to coach people. He didn't want to run mastermind groups. He didn't want to do any of that. He was a behind the scenes guy, which taught me that's okay for me to be that kind of person as well. Like, to be behind the scenes, launching things, because oftentimes, and, you know, I've also spent time with a guy named Shep Gordon, also known as Supermensch. He will be the first to tell you he was a manager for many of the most famous music acts, including Alice Cooper, many more throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Great documentary called Supermensch on Netflix. Everyone should watch it. And I had an opportunity to meet him out at his house in Maui. But he will tell you that fame is one of the worst things that could be put on someone. You know, he would call it a curse. And so, you know, learning that from Mark, it was like, yeah, I don't want to be famous. I don't want everyone to know how much money I have. I want to be a silent guy who's very successful, who takes care of my family and has close friends, you know, and that's what he was. But he was very, very influential. I mean, so influential, he'd have like the presidents of Costa Rica, you know, at his house, you know, like big shots. And he loved that. You know, he did love connecting with very powerful people. But boy, what an interesting guy, you know, just a great guy, and really changed my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I really love, because you know, so many of the people that I get to work with, they are that way. You know, they don't flaunt their wealth. A lot of them, they wouldn't peek out dead in a suit and tie, you know, because that's just not them. You know? So,
well, Mark drove the same car I drove. You know, it was a Toyota Land Cruiser Prado down there. It's a Lexus SUV here. It was just a nice vehicle that got you where you wanted to go, and it was four-wheel drive in case it was rainy season.
yeah.
You know, it just not pretentious at all. Really understood how the game worked and how to do business, and always had ideas that he was executing on. And an inventor. He was really an inventor, and he understood where he was great.
Yeah.
And everyone loved him.
I'm curious, you know, and you, I mean, whether it's Mark or whether it's Shep, I'm just curious, you know, what are one or maybe two things that have transpired as a result of your relationship, with either one of them, that you know for a fact never would have happened without that relationship in place?
It's interesting. Hard to say, but really, you know, because I was sort of doing this already, but Shep has a word for it. He calls it coupons. It's basically doing the right thing and helping people. You know, it's like when you have a connection, you don't hold out on it, you make the connection. And then, you know, it's just being a giver, you know, giving and helping people. But also, I would say this, you know, there's sort of a negative side to being a giver, is that there are takers out there. And if you give, and, you know, that's good until it's not, then it's having a negative effect on your life. And so I think giving without counting, but then also having a distinction where it's like, okay, it's time to stop giving for now, to a certain people who end up being takers. So, I think, but you always want to go out in the world being a giver, being a person who makes an impact. And so, one of my theories is you're one connection away from anything you want in life.
Yeah.
I met my wife because of my good friend, April. She made this wonderful connection for me. It's a lifelong connection. I owe her everything. If she hadn't have done that, like she hadn't been thinking about me, I may have probably never met my wife. And so how can I be that kind of person that introduces someone to their future spouse or their future business partner? I had a meeting last night with a guy. He's a celebrity, is a TV celebrity, Navy SEAL guy. And, we had a nice conversation. I was like, hey, what if we did this, 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 and this? And we're working on a new project right now, that wouldn't happen otherwise. And I'm like, okay, all I have to do is make a few connections here and I'll lead this and we'll do a test and see what works. And man, he was happy, I was happy, but it's really just a series of making connections. So I think with Shep and Mark, the thing I really learned, okay, I had to talk this out to get to this, is that you don't have to be out front to make the largest impact. Sometimes it's best to be behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not everyone should be on stage like a Tony Robbins or Richard Branson or whoever. Some people need to be behind the scenes and making things happen and making other people the celebrity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Kev, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. You for as long as I've known you, you shared some stuff today that I didn't know about you. So that was cool as well. And for anybody listening to this going, man, I just really like that Kevin guy. I love the way he shows up. How can they get more information? How can they find out more of like what some of the stuff you're working on or what have you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is always a good place to find me. It's Kevin Donahue. It's LinkedIn/in/global connector. That's my my tag, which makes sense because I love connecting people. And or executivesalessource.com. It's a mouthful. Executivesalessource.com. You can watch a video. I give a really fantastic sales. It's a 10-minute talk. I actually gave it at Genius Network, and it's a great sales philosophy. My philosophy is called the PRAISE method, and PRAISE is an acronym. Go watch the video and you can find out what it means. But it's how do you sell to the White House? How do you sell to Joe Polish? How do you sell to anyone? And it's powerful. So Executive Sales Source, drop me an email there. That's fine. Facebook, of course, Instagram, Donahue KM. But yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably a good place.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. Any last words before we call it a wrap, Kev?
Well, there's a book I read a long time ago about a guy named Eric Hasselhoff. He's a Dutch guy, and he was kind of a Dutch hero, and it's called In Pursuit of Life. And the guy who writes the foreword to the book has said it's unfair. How could one man live 1,000 lifetimes in one, right? So what I would say is have the courage to let go of what you know and try something new and see if you can live 1,000 lifetimes in one. So wow. Life's a movie, write your own script.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Kev, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Kevin. You're the best.